Samsung or HTC? Who's going to win the premium smartphone race?
Virtual reality, is it ready for prime time?
Welcome to Vertical Hull, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who already lives in his own virtual reality, Adam Turner. Adam, what's new in tech?
Australia's streaming video wars are hotting up as Netflix prepares to launch in Australia on March 24. Netflix is coming to the Fetch TV personal video recorder, while Foxtel-backed Presto is coming to Telstra's T-Box.
Microsoft's announced new Lumia models, the Lumia 640 and Lumia 640 XL. Both will come with dual SIM variants, and they're both mid-range phones, which should please those who are looking for a dual SIM phone in the Windows Phone space that wasn't a budget model, but may not please them enough, of course, if they were looking for a really premium handset. Apparently we'll have to wait a little while for that.
HBO's new US streaming service HBO Now is expected to launch in April in time for the return of Game of Thrones. It will reportedly cost US $15 per month, and it's going to be a tempting option for Australian geo-dodgers who are looking to bypass Foxtel to get some premium HBO content.
Fujitsu's demonstrated some eye scanning technology that it says could one day be used to securely unlock your smartphone. What it does is it takes a precise biometric scan of your eye print, which is said to be as unique as your fingerprint, and then use that for unlocking and other security features. There are some questions that remain about where these details will be stored and what might happen if they leaked, and for now, Fujitsu's only got a prototype to show off. So Adam, HBO Now looks like it's going to have a rough US $15 price point, but is this really going to matter for Australian TV watchers?
It really depends what you want to watch. By the time you convert that into US dollars and allow for your other geo-dodging expenses, it's going to come out at more than $20 a month. Meanwhile, you could get into Foxtel Play for usually $50 a month, but last year they dropped that to $35 during Game of Thrones. So if Game of Thrones is the only reason why you're paying for Foxtel Play, then HBO Now might be a good deal. If there's 2 or 3 shows on Foxtel Play that you like and some of them aren't on HBO Now, then you might actually be better off with the Foxtel one.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it also depends on how much geo-dodging you've got to do, whether or not they'll take credit cards, all that kind of stuff, because certainly they seem to have a pretty sweet deal from their perspective with Foxtel going. They never would have allowed them to block it off iTunes, for example, if they weren't raking in the cash. So it seems unlikely that they'll just very happily say, oh, yes, we're not geo-blocking this at all, or we'll accept every Australian credit card. That's not really
the credit cards is the hard bit. Beating the geo-blocking is the easy bit. Paying them is the hard bit. It's been ridiculously easy with Netflix the last couple of years. It's a running joke how easy it is to get Netflix to take your money. I suspect HBO will be a bit harder, so it's just really going to be hit and miss, but I'm sure people will eventually find the right credit cards and the right combination of billing details and stuff like that to get in. So, Alex, you've been at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona recently. What's caught your eye?
Well, I suppose the big eye-catching things at Mobile World Congress were a whole bunch of wearables and just a couple of premium smartphone releases. The interesting thing here for Mobile World Congress was a lot of the attention for mobiles, what you might think of as a smartphone, was on mid-range or entry-level handsets. There was really only HTC and Samsung saying, right, here's our flagship hero products.
And what was that from Samsung?
Okay, so Samsung had 2 new handsets to deliver, the Galaxy S6 and the Galaxy S6 Edge. Internally, they're fairly similar. Externally, they're not. The S6 is an all-metal Galaxy, which is not something they've done in their absolute premium lines as yet. But the S6 Edge is the real looker of the pair. It's got smoothed edges on both sides, which allow a certain amount of kind of contact manipulation, but largely just make it a really, really good-looking phone.
Now, isn't there a Galaxy Note that's got a curved edge on it and the screen actually goes around the edge? Is this the same thing on the... This is
broadly the same thing, except that it's a smaller screen. It's only a 5.1 inch, where the Note is obviously quite a bit bigger. The Note 4 Edge is quite a bit bigger, I should say. Yeah. But also, Samsung, I think, have realised that the Note 4 Edge was an interesting idea, an interesting experiment, but they were the only ones who were ever likely to build all that much for it. And having your web browser on the side and that kind of thing has sort of kind of only just worked. For this, at least at launch, they've gone for a simpler approach. So the Edge is used to, for example, glow a specific colour when you get a certain contact calling you. You can swipe it to access, I think it's 5 different contacts who, again, are colour-coded. It's a more simple tool, and that's probably a better thing. As I said, the thing that stood out for me was not this added functionality so much as it was what it did to the design, both the look of it, but also how you hold it, because when you've got something that tapers off at the sides like that, it's quite a different experience to holding just about any other smartphone you've ever seen.
It sounds to me, I mean, for a while we've been approaching that smartphone singularity where there is the one perfect design, regardless of the operating system.
Look, there could be, and I mean, I've got to be honest, Samsung never met a gimmick it didn't love. And certainly one of the big problems with the S5 was it was just packed with gimmicks, most of which people didn't particularly use. They seem to have pared that back a bit this year, although that's also not without its compromises. Both of these units now feature a sealed battery, something Samsung railed against for years. Neither of them will allow you microSD expansion, and that's weird for a metal phone because, sorry, Samsung, but others, yeah, fine, Apple don't, but that's Apple, they're Apple, but other Android manufacturers making full metal unibody phones have managed to work out putting a microSD slot in there anyway, and frankly, I think they really should have. Disappointingly as well, the S5 was waterproof, but neither the S6 nor the S6 Edge have that particular functionality, and I think that's a real loss. It essentially leaves that particular part of the market in premium handsets to Sony. Yeah, I mean, I suppose in any design there always have to be compromises, and it could well be that they looked at all of this and realised, well, we can do the unibody, but we can't do the waterproofing because we want this type of USB connector. I'm sure it's a complicated matter, but it's a disappointing experience, I would say, overall. Although, of course, they weren't the only ones, as I said before, launching a new handset at Mobile World Congress. HTC also had their premium luxury phone, the HTC One M9, to show off. Okay, well, HTC's big pitch for the One M9 is that it's a luxury phone. And they obviously must have had luxury on the brain because this is a phone that, ostensibly, to look at, really doesn't look that much different from the HTC One M7 or One M8. They've stuck with much the same visual design, although they now have this kind of interesting two-tone metal finish and a few more colour choices than they've had previously. What they've done to differentiate it is they've put things in like Dolby virtual surround sound, and yes, it's virtualized. It's not quite as good as having speakers out the back of you, but in a smartphone, that's going to be terribly impractical. They've reworked their Sense UI such that you can do things like build themes out of your photos and tweak details around there, and they've changed their camera setup. They've dropped the ultra-pixel camera out the back. This was their low megapixel but high sensor size camera that theoretically gave you better light pickup in low light situations. That's now at the front to give you better selfies if you're that type. And they've got a 20 megapixel camera out the back. It's a nice unit. I had a reasonable amount of testing time with it. Not enough for a full-on review, but it's a nice enough unit. And it'll be really interesting to see with that, and actually with the Samsung as well, where they price them. Because, as I said before, the big thing coming out of Mobile World Congress were loads and loads of mid-range or entry-level phones that are actually really quite good phones. Okay, well, I mean, visually, what they've shown off so far is just the developer model, and it looks like any other VR system, a big set of chunky goggles that you put on your head. The difference with the HTC Vive is that it's fully tethered to a PC, and it includes positional elements, which is to say, it's not just that you're turning your head this way or that. and seeing things around it, but that you can physically move around the real world and it will model an environment in the virtual world that you move around as well. Now that's a big differential step for them, although it's not one without its challenges, of course, because you don't necessarily want to be playing a game in a VR world and then trip over the cat, for example, and they don't seem to have any really good answers for that one just yet, although it is early days. They've essentially said that developer kits soonish, but that we won't see a consumer version of the Vive until the end of the year. Hmm. Yeah, I think the non-positional stuff, your Gear VR and your straight up Oculus Rift, are probably quite good for simple entertainment purposes. I mean, there's that deal that Qantas have where they're picking up a whole bunch of Gear VR for their first class passengers. And the very first time I tried on a Gear VR, I thought some airline is going to pick this up because if you can make airline travel any more pleasant, then please do so. And this seems like a really obvious, easy way to get past that issue of tiny little screens in head, in armrests, that kind of thing, because you can have a screen as big as you like. So for those kind of entertainment purposes, that non-moving stuff is probably fine, and actually that's the stuff I think we'll probably see a little bit more movement on before we see the positional stuff, because aside from this issue of tripping over furniture or whatever, you've obviously got a lot more programming complexity. You've got to get people to build experiences that work with it. It's a chicken and egg situation. HTC's in a good position here in one sense because they're launch partner for this, and they've said they're working with them for both software and hardware, is Valve, the games guys. So clearly you've got to kind of think, right, well, Half-Life 3 perhaps, that'd be kind of interesting in a virtual way. They did. They had a quick and simple Portal demo, and I'm sure that. Yeah, look, I know the reality with those kind of demos, though, is I'm sure they've worked on that thing for months, and everyone else is going to be sitting there waiting, going, right, well, will this take off? Has this taken off? Is this the time to start putting development time? Because these kinds of experiences, these kinds of virtual setups are going to take serious time to develop and program. So it could well be that the Vive comes out, almost like your classic games console problem. The Vive comes out at the end of the year with one or two things it can do. And, I suppose you can always, browse the web virtually and do all the flat screen things that you can do with the existing Gear VR and Oculus stuff. But then it could well be 6 to 12 months before the tide of software starts flowing. You see this with hardware all the time. It happened even with simple stuff like the iPad. It took a fair while for really genuine iPad-specific applications to start coming, and now there are countless thousands of tablet-specific applications out there. I think virtual reality is going to go the same way. Although HTC is not the only player in this field. There's also Sony with the Morpheus, for example. Yeah, and I mean, I think like with everything, we will start out with, and certainly the current experience is largely this. We will start out with fairly blocky, pixelated, simple stuff because it's programmatically simpler, and we will build up to that kind of Red Dwarf better than life experience, where it starts in one sense, of course, to get terribly, terribly dangerous because some of us would never leave the house again. Mm. Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I mean, this is also where I find this stuff fascinating, because the early models that they're showing off are largely these entertainment experiences. It's watching movies, it's playing games. But of course, you could do so much more with a properly realized virtual world. HTC alluded to this in discussions I've had with them about it, one day being used for brain surgery. If your brain surgeon happened to be, in the States and you were in Australia, but they could set up a perfect virtualized model with, with robots doing the work on the other end of it. Theoretically, that could work. Now, the concept scares me. I don't want to be the guinea pig for VR brain surgery to speak of, but the concept is fascinating, because then that changes an awful lot about the way we interact with the world that we live in, let alone the virtual world. Once you start crossing those kinds of boundaries, I think that's where VR starts to show its real, genuine potential outside of the entertainment sphere. And that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold.